So we're right here in the warm-up. And I'd like you to write a response to the quote by Samira Ahmed. She says, every child deserves to see themselves as heroes on the page. What does that mean to you, and what does that mean in your teaching practice? I'm going to go ahead and send you to your first home group. So your home group is the people that you work with on a regular basis during our session. You're going to collaborate with this same group, and you'll be together every single time. This is a strategy that a lot of teachers around the district are trying that has really helped kids to try to open up a little bit more, to actually talk and collaborate with their peers. I know a lot of times when you send kids to breakout rooms, how many of you had that experience where you sent them to a breakout room and you go check and it's black? No screens on, no cameras on, everyone's still muted. Shake your head if that sounds familiar. So home groups are a way to try to help your kids get familiar with each other and have a little collaborative group that they know they can rely on. So your home group is going to be the group that you're sharing with during the session this morning, okay? I'm going to send you to your home group, and I'd like you to discuss your response to the quote. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Here we go.
Doll, and that wasn't weird. Like, it was like, oh, I just think her skin's pretty and I want it, like I want to have that doll. And so I think like the fact that my parents were cool with that, which shouldn't be a shocker, but I'm like grateful for it, and I think having diversity is not only important for the kids to see themselves, but I think also for the kids to see all different types of diversity and know that that's normal and good and should be celebrated.
Absolutely.
And I think that's kind of where I'm at. I know like when I was in grad school at UTSA, we had a big push for multicultural literature, and that really helped me grow as a teacher. My last year at UTSA, we did have a professor that tried to bring in queer studies, and that created such a huge controversy on campus, and the class didn't make. I had signed up for it. But I know that, for me as a Latina woman, that's another layer that I would like to incorporate into my classroom. Like when I present Richard Blanco's work, I've told the kids, that he is an LGBTQ.
Yeah, I was just saying, having students read diverse authors and seeing the characters and the plot lines and the stories, it's important.
Yeah, have you guys read Samira Ahmed?
No.
Have you read it? So the one book that I read of hers, the Love, Hate, and Other Filters, is amazing. I love that book. It's a teenage, coming of age. It's really good.
Oh, good. I read Internment, and I really enjoyed Internment. I think I wish. Okay, hang on. Sorry, guys. Let me do some housekeeping real quick. I really loved Internment. I wished there was some of it that I felt was pretty predictable, but Love, Hate, and Other Filters is on my list, so I'll have to pick that one up.
Yeah, it's really good. I like the way it's written, kind of like a story within a story. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing. I just popped in to see how you guys were doing. Before we go to our next part, can someone tell me, unmute yourself, please, and tell me what was something that you heard in your home group that you thought was really interesting, that just spoke to you about seeing yourself as a hero on the page?
I'll go. I was talking to my group about, obviously I am represented a lot in media and books and things like that. But my sister, she is in an interracial relationship. So her kids are biracial. My nephews are biracial. And she talked about seeing a family who is biracial on a Cheerios commercial one time. And she said that it made her feel really good to see somebody who looked like her family. And I think that before my group kind of talked about how we grew up, it was multicultural. So we feel really normal, like, oh, okay, this is how it is.
Right.
But it was like a light bulb, like, oh, not everybody feels as represented as I do. And that it does push me to try to do that in my own curriculum. I do First Chapter Fridays, and I really want to try to add things that speak to my students, to each of them, and not just one group.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that, Brittany. I was talking in the last session, Rachel Gray Castro was with us, and she said, I'm really on the hunt for books about Jewish characters, with Jewish characters that are not about the Holocaust. And so far, we've literally
I have a book you can share with her.
Oh, what is it, Amanda?
In the Neighborhood of Truth. I read it. Oh yeah, and Quentin just threw one in the chat too. But yeah, In the Neighborhood of Truth.
Awesome. Thank you. I was telling her, some of you may know the video game The Last of Us, and they just came out with part 2. Yeah, I know. I see my gamers in the room. They just came out with part 2, and I was reading a review of the game, and the author said that is the first. So the protagonist is a teenage girl, and she has a girlfriend, and her girlfriend is Jewish, and she is the first Jewish character in a video game that is not set in the Holocaust or Nazi Germany or fighting robotic Nazis and robot Hitler. So, I mean, I think your point is so well taken, Brittany, about representation and how people are or are not represented in media. And we have such a diverse culture, such a diverse society, but are we seeing that in our media as well? Yeah. Water for Elephants. Quentin, the protagonist is Jewish. Am I remembering that? Who is?
Jacob, I think was his name, because I remember there's a point where one of the characters calls, and it's not in the movie, but in the book, because I read it for my AP English 3 class. Shout out to Judy Eno. She's not on this call, but I read it, and there's a part where one of the like freaks calls the ringmaster the Jewish racial slur, and he gets like really upset about it.
Gotcha. Okay. And Carly, thank you for yes, no, maybe. Someone already gave us that one as well. I'm writing these down so I can send these to Rachel and add these to our list. Kenny says, I remember that Cheerios commercial and the racist backlash. Yes, absolutely. Fun fact, San Antonio has the lowest Jewish population per capita in the country. That's interesting because I had a really large population of Jewish students when I taught at Clark. So it's interesting to see those sort of pockets of different kind of students demographics around the city. So the next thing I'd like you to do, and again, you can write this on your participant page. You have room for it here under number 1, is I'd like you to make a list of the books, articles, publications, websites, poems, anything that you have read recently. And I'm going to let you define recently any way you want to. I know a lot of us in here, I mean, we're all English teachers. Some of us are our SPED cohorts, our SPED colleagues, but again, also English fans I know from being in the rooms with us every day. And I know that we're avid readers, but it's 2020. We're all in distance learning hell. So if you have not had time to do a lot of reading, to do as much reading as you wish, there is no judgment here. You can define recently any way that you want. So please write down a list of all the things that you've read recently. And on my list, I include things like the New York Times, the Washington Post, New York Magazine, all the different things that I read on my phone, because I'm constantly reading on my phone. Twitter, right? I'm a big Twitter EDU follower. So make a list of everything that you've read recently. Once you've got a pretty good list, I'd like you to think about the trends that you see in the titles. And it might be the genres. I read a lot of nonfiction. I think that's left over from my days as an AP Lang teacher. So I really prefer nonfiction, but I also kind of force myself to pick up fiction every now and then just to keep my hand in. Is there a format, a common format, like a lot of ebooks, a lot of digital reading, or are you someone who's just a diehard, love to have a physical book in my hand, love to read a physical book? Do you see a lot of commonalities in the gender of the characters, or the race or ethnicity of the characters or the authors, or the family structure, or any of the things on that screen, any trends? Whose voice and perspective is central to your reading list? When I reach for fiction, I always prefer some kind of dystopic, post-apocalyptic fiction. So what are you noticing in your reading list? Go to our class Menti, and if you're looking at your participant page right here on number 2, you'll see the link to our Mentimeter. And I want you to tell me what you saw in your reading list. What were the trends? So we've got some really interesting trends here. We've got a lot of nonfiction readers for one thing. I know I read a lot lately about current events and about politics. We've got a lot that say female, which is really interesting. I'm wondering if that's female protagonist. I see a pretty big female protagonist, but are we also reading a lot of female authors? Very interesting. Okay, fiction is making a comeback here. We're getting a little bit bigger. American and a lot of young adult. You know, I feel like as an English major and as a former AP teacher, I'm not supposed to say it, but I love young adult fiction. I would rather read young adult than some of the more serious adult fiction. Fantasy, very interesting. Yeah, go fantasy. Thanks, Amanda. Very interesting. Thrillers are making, thrillers. Quentin, you're so funny. Very interesting. Female protagonist is getting a lot bigger as well. I'm glad I'm not the only dystopic reader out there. Current events, American. Okay, very interesting. We've got a pretty diverse reading list just for us, right, personally. So there's a lot of interesting trends on our Mentimeter. Comic books, true accounts, diverse authors, literary nonfiction, empowerment. Really interesting to see not only what is really large, but also what is really small on our list. Okay. Next one. I'd like you to make a list of your regularly taught texts. Think major works. That can include short stories that you go to every year. I know some of us are really in love with the Scarlet Ibis. That story's just never gonna go away. And if you teach multiple grade levels, you can include text for both. It's totally up to you. I'm gonna, again, let you define usually or regularly any way you want to. And I'm gonna ask you to do the same thing. What trends do you notice in those regularly taught texts? Whose voice and perspective is central to your, and that should say teaching list. Who's central to your teaching lists? Okay, when we're ready, we're going to go to our Mentimeter again. Old dystopian. Yeah, I remember my sophomores telling me, can we read something where not everybody dies at the end? Because everything we read is so depressing.
My sophomores told me the same thing, but yet they still loved all of the ones where people died at the end. Kenny says, no, we're here to destroy your innocence. Only stories where everybody dies. A lot of texts about injustice. And again, I find it really interesting to notice what's big, but also what's really tiny. Jim says, see those students at graduation with their shoulders slumped and dejected look. Those are mine. Oh, Jim. I'm gonna flip back to our personal reading lists. And I want you to tell me what you notice between our reading lists and our teaching lists. And you can just drop that into the chat. So here is our reading lists. But what do you notice? What are some of the similarities? What are some of the differences?
Very interesting. Jay says the difference in accessibility. I tried to bring in my own reading as examples for choice assignments. Absolutely. Absolutely. Carmen says my personal list influences my teacher list. Yeah. And Carmen, I think we can all say the same, right? For better or for worse. I'll go back to our teaching list one more time. Any other similarities or differences that you notice? Amanda says, I end up making students read about the Arctic because it fascinates me, but they don't usually know what snow is. No, they don't. Especially the kind of snow that we get in Texas, in San Antonio. It's not really snow, right? Very interesting. We want to think about how our students are represented and not represented in the text that we read. I'm going to take you to our next point. This is the Bechdel test. How many people have heard of the Bechdel test? It's usually applied to film. Okay, good. So the Bechdel test is usually applied to film. It's named for Alison Bechdel, who's a cartoonist, and she wrote about the kinds of movies that she chooses to see. And she said she only watches movies that can pass this test. Number one, it has at least 2 female characters. Number 2, the female characters talk to each other. And number 3, they talk about something other than men. Ah, look at that. Oh, I saw all these great reactions just then. This last one was added by a professor at Boston University, Dr. Jimenez. She said, and the women's bodies aren't represented in a way that is overtly sexualized. I mean, if some of our books passed the first 3, I'm not sure about that third one. And that real tricky one is number 2 and number 3, right? They have to talk to each other, and it has to be something about something other than men. At first I thought, okay, Antigone passes the test. 2 strong women, 3 actually really good female characters. They don't talk to each other about anything other than men. And the entire plot of Antigone is driven by male agency. So Antigone just failed the test. The second one is the Duvernay test, and it's named for the movie director Ava DuVernay. And it's very simply put, minority characters. So first of all, there have to be some, right? Minority characters have fully realized lives rather than serving as scenery in white stories.
Barbara, there's another test there's another test that I can't think of the name of, but it's similar to the Duvernay test where they have kind of the same checklist. And it's a little more like the minority characters can't just be like best friends or sidekicks. They can't be like are they like a magical?
Yeah.
They can't be like a magical or like subservient role. Yeah. Like they kind of have that same checklist too that I think is interesting.
Yeah, that's a great question.
The 90s Nickelodeon test.
Yeah.
Say that again, Quentin.
I said, let's call that the 90s Nickelodeon test.
Seriously.
Tell me about that one.
Well, so when you think about like most cartoons in the 90s, well, I don't want to like dunk on Nickelodeon or anything because they're awesome, but because they had like shows like All That and Kenan and Kel that did have representation. But you go back and look at like all of the classic shows, like the ones that everyone remembers, like Rugrats and Hey Arnold, they do have black characters, but they're never at the forefront. But there are episodes that really do focus on, like they have a Kwanzaa episode once it came back from like its like weird hiatus in the middle. And then I know that on Hey Arnold, which is my personal favorite, there are a couple of episodes where they really kind of focus on, you know, the black character and his family, but it's never really like, it's never at the forefront of anything. And it's something that the kids notice for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I've got a lot of people in the chat mentioning Disney movies. And yeah, the new set of Disney movies, the new Disney princess, very different. Not as many prince comes and arrives to save the princess stories. And Frozen was one of the first movies where it was not some kind of prince as the savior. And I always say, regardless of its flaws, Frozen 1 and 2, one of the things I love about that movie is that Anna, for all of her flaws and her craziness and her her crazy antics, Anna is the savior. It's not Elsa and her magic powers. It's Anna who really saves her sister again and again. So we've got lots of really great comments in the chat. Yes, and Chantal wrote a whole paper about Disney and feminism. Thank you, Chantal. I know that's a big trend right now. But also there was a lot of backlash when Frozen came out. And a lot of people saying we need more. What happened to that savior? Why can't boys be the savior or be the problem solver? I loved, yes, Mulan, Frozen, Lilo and Stitch. I loved Moana. Yes, thank you, Amanda, Moana, for that exact reason. And there's no romantic entanglement in Moana, right? So she just gets to be on her own and have this great sort of older brother figure in the text. So lots of great comments. Yes, Sebastian, thank you for dropping in that link to the Bechdel test website. There was a whole conversation recently about whether along with the Me Too movement a couple of years ago, about whether or not the books, the Best Picture nominees passed the Bechdel test or the DuVernay. Coco was, yes, so great for that exact reason. And Kenny says, Deani, yeah, that scene where Shank tells Vanellope that you can be best friends without having to do everything together. Absolutely. Love it. So here's that question for us as we're thinking about the Bechdel and the DuVernay. Do any of the texts on your regularly taught list pass the Bechdel test? And Erin Brockovich is a good one, except she's very sexualized. Even the real Erin Brockovich said she didn't really dress like that in real life. The next question is, how about the DuVernay? We had a long conversation on our team, me, Tracy, Tony, Emily, Kelly, about whether or not the books that we regularly teach pass the DuVernay or the Bechdel. And do any of them pass both? Ponder that one for a minute and then drop any titles you can think of in the chat. Anthem. Oh, that's really interesting, Brittany. Yeah, isn't that kind of the point, right? Is everybody's sort of the same in Anthem?
Our sophomores loved that book.
I can't stand that book. That's so interesting. I can't stand it.
I think it's the way we set it up. I think we did a really good job setting it up. It made them feel really interested in what happened.
Okay, even one or the other. If you want to just say, I think this book passes the Bechdel or this book passes the DuVernay, such a great play. Raisin in the Sun passes both. Secret Life of Bees, absolutely. Sunny's Blues. The short story, right? Last period, someone said their eyes were watching God. And I said, does Janie have conversations with other women that are not about men? Very interesting. So the Bechdel test, To Kill a Mockingbird passes for sure, right? Does it pass the DuVernay?
I would say no, it doesn't pass the DuVernay test.
Yeah, what are you thinking about that, Joel?
It's more dealing with the prejudice that was going on back in the day, because how can someone who just has use of one hand be accused of choking someone? And my freshmen, when they were reading that, they couldn't understand it, so I actually had to stand up and demonstrate it.
Gotcha.
And when I demonstrated, they finally realized that, I think his name was Joe, that Joe really couldn't have done it.
Right.
But if I hadn't gotten up to kind of demonstrate, opposed it, they never would have gotten anything that was going on.
Absolutely. And I think we can all agree that Tom Robinson is not a fully realized character. Right? He's not someone that we see fully developed as a person. The only person I would say who is Calpurnia. But I'm not 100% sure that she has agency of her own outside of Jem and Scout's story. I've got two really good responses in the chat: The Hate You Give and The Glass Castle. Very interesting. And my question to you is, are we teaching those, are those regularly taught books that we've taught whole class the way we have To Kill a Mockingbird. All right.
No.
So I'm going to send you back to your home group. And there's a couple of things to talk about with your home group. First of all, how are our students represented or not represented in the texts we teach? And what should our goal be? Because we're certainly not saying we should not teach any books that don't pass the Bechdel test. We're not saying every book on your list should pass the Duvernay. So then what should the goal be for ourselves? Again, how are our students represented or not represented in the text? And what should our goal be? I'm going to send you to your home group to talk about those questions.
In my discussion post usually for the day is like, what show or movie are you currently obsessed with, and how can you see a connection between what we're looking at in class and what you're reading? So it would be interesting to see those connections they're making between whatever it is they're choosing and something like this, like, hey, think about the show you're watching right now. Does it pass this test? What are you noticing about the things that you're choosing to watch, or the things that are out there for you to watch? How is the media controlling your mind? How about that?
That's a great point. I love that.
Well, there's definitely a correlation between media bias and the literature and entertainment that we choose to involve and engulf ourselves in. And there's tests beyond those. I think there's a Waith, Pierce, and 10 or 12 other tests that measure gender imbalances and minority imbalances, and how youth are kind of led in the direction that they are to take in certain information and leave out other. And it's even backed by politics and where money is fueled. So I think it's our responsibility as teachers to incorporate those ideas so that way our students can make informed decisions for themselves and be open and willing to look at different avenues and how they feed their mind. So, and we don't do that.
When we think about representation in our classes, what should our goal be? I just came in to see how y'all were doing, by the way. Hi, ladies.
I think it's to help students be able to make their own decisions and to be able to take in information from different perspectives in order to be more inclusive of everyone and everything, how to take in ideas from different places and then be able to formulate your own ideas and thoughts. And that's very uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Yeah, very true. Thank you, ladies. I'm going to pop in for another group.
Book and says a lot of important things about diversity and minority life. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm done. I'm done talking. I shouldn't even be talking about this. I don't teach English. I teach speech. Okay.
Oh, but it's those are good points too.
You guys are
They're
doing.
good points.
I feel like the pieces that we choose when it comes to like minorities, especially females, it doesn't help them. It just kind of points out what is wrong with the female population. Like, I don't feel like they're empowering or guiding our female generation to become like who they can become. I feel like we use so many past texts that it just shows the wrong and not so much like how to help fix that. And so I know I read a lot of like I'm reading Untamed, and it's one of those, all right, she empowered herself, you know, and she realized she was not living the way she should be living or loving the way she should be loving. And so with that text, it's just like, wow, if these kids could, or these women or minorities could read text like that nowadays and relate, then especially now because she was married, you know, to a male, she falls in love with a female, and this is real life, you know, this is a nonfiction book. And so I feel like if women or even our high school kids, because, you know, I teach high school, they realize that they need to become who they truly are rather than what society, you know, has implemented how we should live. I feel like that would help shape them and make them feel better about themselves. So I don't know. I just feel like we need more texts that help guide rather than pinpoint, oh, that's wrong or that's not the norm anymore. So.
Okay, thank you. I just came to see how you guys were doing. Lisa, that's brilliant. Please share that when we come back to the whole group. I love that you said that. So welcome back. What was something that you heard in your breakout group that really influenced your thinking, that sort of echoed some of the things that you heard? And Lisa Cisneros, do you want to start us off?
Sure, why not?
Thank you, Lisa.
So we were just talking about, you know, the different pieces that we read or share with our classes. And personally, I don't have a specific genre. Like, I love to read all kinds of books. And I was telling my group how I was reading, it's called Untamed. And it is, it's nonfiction. It's about an author, and she's married, because that's, you know, what you do. You get married to a man, you have kids, and you become the housewife and the homemaker. And she comes to this realization that she's not happy in her marriage. And so on this book tour, she meets another author who she falls in love with, and it's a girl. And so she says, you know, I need to learn to love myself, who I am, who I've become, or who I really truly was. And I need to teach my kids to do the same if they see me unhappy. So anyway, it's a really good book. It's kind of empowering for women. And I feel like in class, or when we teach a piece, that we mostly point out what was wrong when it came to women and injustice and us growing, and we don't actually guide with text how to become that better person when it comes to minority of women and their injustice, and us, you know, being stronger and becoming who we are, rather than adjusting to society's norms and how we should portray ourselves. And so rather than reading texts that just point out what we're doing wrong or what we did wrong in the past, why not implement texts to help guide our younger generation into being better? And so that was just one of the conversations that we had when it came to, you know, the female characters and how they portray themselves in certain texts.
Right. Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome.
I think that issue really came home for me a couple of years ago when Captain Marvel came out in the movie theater. And I took my kids and my niece to go see the movie. And there's this great montage at the end. Some of you have seen it, you'll know, where she is having this vision and remembering all the times that she was knocked down. And the antagonist says, "You're only human," or something like that. And there's this montage of all the times that she got back up and picked herself back up. And you see her stand up and do the superhero pose. My daughter jumped up out of her seat in the movie theater and went, "Yes, girl power." I was like,
Yes.
whoa. It just happened. My son, on the other hand, was like, "Yeah, it's kind of a girl movie." And I said, "Captain Marvel is a girl movie?" But my daughter just went, "Yes, girl power," like empowerment. We've got to have both, right? It can't just be stories about how flawed we are. We also need stories about how empowered we are. Thank you for sharing that, Lisa. Anything else that came out of your group? You did a great job, by the way. Anything else that came out of our group discussion that you wanted to share?
With regard to the goal, what should our goal be?
Yes, Kenny.
Touching off of what you just said, Barbara, I've been teaching the Bechdel test for many years. And I think it's really important not just to teach books that pass the test, but to explicitly teach about the Bechdel test, because then students can then apply that when they go off and read books of their own choice, and they can use that critical eye. And I think it's also important, you know, talking about the boys and the girls and how they see these stories. Like, I think it's really important to understand that, like, teaching stories that pass the Bechdel test isn't for girls. It's for everyone to normalize and internalize the idea that women are, you know, full human beings with agency, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, similarly with minority representation of other, I mean, women are a minority, they're a majority. With other marginalized groups or minority groups, that like we read those stories not for those kids, it's for everybody, so that we can all get used to the idea that, you know, we're all the same when it, you know, where it counts, etc.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that, Kenny. Absolutely. We need stories where we can all recognize that we are all, I love how you said that, fully realized human beings. Thank you for sharing that. Carly says, yes, the scene in Endgame when all the women superheroes come together and they're like, she's not alone. That was my favorite scene in Infinity War when it's Scarlett Johansson and the one, you know what I'm talking about, these like three awesome, yes, thank you, Okoye and Scarlet Witch. Oh my gosh, Quentin, of course, thank you for saving me. But those three female characters, when they say she's not alone, and I remember in the theater going, yes, here we go. I'm so excited to see that. Such a great scene. And I love that Kenny made that point, that it's not just we should teach the Bechdel test or texts that pass the Bechdel or the Duvernay for girls, but for all of our kids, so that they see themselves and others as heroes on the page. Thank you so much. What a brilliant conversation just now. Thank you, guys. So I've given you the link to this article in NCTE called Having the Difficult Conversations. And the author says, recently Duluth Public Schools removed To Kill a Mockingbird and Huckleberry Finn from the standard curriculum. To be clear, these books have not been banned. They are still available in the library and hopefully encouraged as reading, but they will not be the primary focus of whole class reading. I saw big colorful boxes pop up on Facebook declaring To Kill a Mockingbird being removed because it's offending students. Isn't that kind of the point? Well, yes, I said in response, but here's the key. Is it offending the right readers? Is it making the right people uncomfortable? If it's the few African-American students in the classroom who are upset at the repetitive crush of the N-word from a white writer's pen, then no, it is not the right readers. We were discussing this in our team, and Kelly Palmer said the most brilliant thing about this quote. She said, if you're offended by the content, you're never going to get to the learning. And we had some really great conversations about this a couple of years ago at NCTE. And one of the presenters said, you know, a lot of our districts, a lot of our schools will nix a book because it has the F word, right? It's got the F word. No one should be reading that. That cannot be for whole class instruction. And one of the presenters asked us, why is it okay for a student to hear or read the N word 75 times in Huck Finn, but they're not allowed to hear the F word even once? And I think the answer is it's not okay. We have a lot of parents who are asking questions, and a lot of students who are asking questions about our reading list, even more now that we're in distance learning. I'm sure many of you know that you have parents that are basically taking the class alongside their child because they're sitting there with them in their home office or in their kitchen or in their bedroom or wherever as their son or daughter or grandchild or whoever is taking that course. And so they're hearing those conversations. They're reading along with their child. They're talking with them about the kinds of things you're discussing in class. And a lot of our parents are saying, why does my child have to read that text? Here's our next piece. I'd like you to think about some of these questions when you're choosing something, especially as a whole class text. And I just want to point out that these are here in your participant page. First of all, what is my goal in teaching this resource and what skills am I trying to develop? Once we focus on the skill or the goal or the learning objective, that opens up to a lot of different texts. A lot of text will help me hit that target. Second, have I read the entire resource or watched the entire video? That is critical. I made that mistake as a young teacher by offering a book that I had not finished reading. And oh, that was a mistake. I would not repeat that again for sure. Third, is the content age appropriate and relevant to students' interests and readiness levels? Next, does this text include racial slurs or offensive language? And I always reminded my kids, some of you have parents or some of you as readers prefer books that do not have a lot of intense profanity. And if that is you, then this book is not for you. You want to choose something else. This one's really critical, especially in distance learning. If you choose a book with racial slurs or offensive language, you also need to ask yourself, have I created a safe, inclusive, and respectful classroom? That is critical right now in distance learning. If this was a typical year and we were in November, you would already have those great connections, those wonderful relationships with your kids. You would know how to navigate difficult conversations when you were face-to-face with your students. Some of you, nod your head if this is you, some of you still don't know what your kids look like because they don't turn on their cameras. And so creating a safe, inclusive, and respectful classroom is so much harder in distance learning. Someone last period was saying that they got a new in-person student. She walked in for the first time and they said, "We're so excited to see you. Who are you?" Because they'd never seen her face before. She'd never turned on her camera, not even once. And so that conversation is totally different in distance learning. Next, what concerns do I have about teaching this text? I always knew when I was starting a text that was problematic, I knew it in advance. And just me, as much as I loved Of Mice and Men, the profanity and the N-word made me personally very uncomfortable as the teacher. So I knew it was problematic in advance. So what concerns do you have when you're starting that text? And if a parent or a community member challenges that text, how would you respond? You know, in a way that is respectful and that honors and recognizes their concerns as valid. Any other questions, by the way, that you would add to this list? Things that you consider and ask yourself when you're choosing a book for your students? By the way, in the chat, we've got some really great responses. Kenny says, at Health Careers, we've decided this year to not teach To Kill a Mockingbird anymore. We think those messages can be better conveyed from a genuine Black perspective, like The Hate U Give. Yes, thank you, Kenny. Great response. Quentin says, what does my PLC think about this? That's another great response. That's another question we should be asking ourselves. And I know what's interesting is my husband is also, he's an elementary school teacher, and I was talking to him about my session. And hashtag irony, he said, you know, I've never read To Kill a Mockingbird, and he's a Northside graduate. So that should tell you something. His teacher certainly assigned To Kill a Mockingbird back when he was a freshman. But he said, I've never read that book. Should I read it? And I said, I don't think that you're the target audience, so I'm not sure that it's going to speak to you. Joel, excellent question. Another question to ask is, how does that story make you feel? Quentin also never read To Kill a Mockingbird, and you are a fully functioning English teacher who is good at choosing text for your kids. You don't have to have read that book to be a great teacher, right? Still aced pre-AP English 1. So you may be asking yourself, where can I find great books with diverse characters for my students? There's a couple of places I would recommend, and these are all on your participant page. So NCTE Build Your Stack. That's an ongoing thread on the NCTE blog about different books that will fit and appeal to different kinds of kids. The Young Adult Literacy School Association, I can't remember the exact acronym, I'm sorry, but they also have a great best fiction for young adults list. The Tayshaws list is specific for Texans and for put together by Texas librarians. This is my personal favorite, the National Book Awards Young People's Literature category. So if you go to the National Book Award website, they have all of their award winners listed by year. And there is a whole section called Young People's Literature. And they have the award winner, they have the finalists, and then they have the long list. And Sabrina, thank you. What an excellent question. She added, does the text come from an author who can accurately speak to the events in the book? Yeah, great credibility check, right? Whose perspective, again, are we representing? So I really love the National Book Award Young Adult Literature section. That's where I discovered Patron Saints of Nothing, which is one of my favorite books that I've read recently. And the author, Randy Rebai, said he had never seen a Filipino-American character on a book cover until his book. And he is a Filipino-American writer. We also, so I know it's 2020, we're all sort of languishing in 2020 fatigue, but this is the mock book order that Vanessa Martinez at Brennan and I worked on. I'm going to drop that link into the chat for you. And we put together a list of books just as a sample, right? Just for your information that you can look at that would work for our curriculum and for each of the grade levels. So you can take a look at the different grade levels and see some book suggestions that would work for AP, pre-AP, Gen Ed. We also have some AP Lang titles for those of us looking for some more nonfiction choices. And then if you see a book on here that you're interested in, but you don't recognize, you can go to the book suggestion tab, and I've given you the synopsis and then any notes about maybe it's an award winner, if it's got a specific demographic or a specific audience or a theme or a grade level where it's more or less appropriate. So just some places where you can go to find some really good books for your kids and to replenish your classroom library. Okay. All right. The last piece that I do want to talk to you about is about our table groups, which we called our home groups today. This is that strategy that I was telling you is one that you might want to try with your kids. It comes from a couple of different places, but there is more information about this on the Cult of Pedagogy blog and on her podcast. She did a whole session about how to teach when everyone is scattered. And one of the suggestions was to create student cohorts. So as your kids get more and more into their home group, as they practice more, discussing just with that small regular group of participants, they might be more willing to turn on their camera, to unmute their mic, to participate in discussions because it becomes that safe home group. Now, your seniors and your juniors are probably better at this just because they know each other a little bit more. They've been in school together a little bit more. But your home group, for your freshmen and your sophomores, you may want to be purposeful in assigning them to a home group and then testing it out and seeing how well they do. But this strategy comes from Julie Morgan, who's at Health Careers. And I know some of you hear Health Careers and you go, oh, well, those kids are perfect. That's not going to work for me if it works at Health Careers. But I want you to know that Julie tried this strategy because that first couple of weeks of school, her AP seniors had cameras off, were muted, were not responding in the chat, were not responding in their discussion groups. And she had that same experience. She put them into breakouts and no one would talk. And so she made her table groups, and it's that same concept. She had kids sign up for the table they wanted to work in, and then she would purposefully put them into different collaborative tasks together. And eventually they opened up to each other. And this is seniors at a magnet school. So they knew each other, but still didn't want to turn on their cameras for all the reasons that your kids don't as well. What's brilliant about that home group Google Doc is that she can hyperlink things. So here's table 1. I can add the hyperlink for a small group assignment for table 1, for table 3, for table 4, and now the kids can all access it from that one central location. Okay. And then on your participant page, I've given you a YouTube tutorial for how Julie sets that up with her kids, and then the template that you can copy and use with your students. Okay.